Oh, yeah. It's time for a Bible Brodown podcast. Here we go.
Ooh, wrong one.
Good morning. Today, we're going to be talking about the image of God. What is it? What does it entail? Is it a responsibility? Is it a set of qualities? I don't know. We'll have to find out.
It's hard to make thumbnails, but I did
You do a
notice
good
that
job.
there's a lot of image of God studies out there with like the ancient fingers touching, I'm sure some artist from long ago is the one that did it, but I found this one and I thought it was cooler because, it's got the universe behind it and a big bright light.
Are you talking about the Sistine Chapel, the roof with the...
Well, there's this too. Yeah. Yep. That thing.
That old guy, yeah.
Mhm.
It was one of the Ninja Turtles that did it, actually.
Oh, Donatello.
Yeah.
Michelangelo.
No, Michelangelo, yeah.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Yeah, image of God. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. We were going to do this last week, but Matt ran into work. But we wrote this 2 weeks ago, and obviously it's been stirring in my mind. And if you're watching, you can see that one of us takes the image of God seriously, and the other obviously does not.
The other one is repping the Astros, and I don't want to hear nothing about it because we're one game away from winning. Okay,
like the astrophysicists. You like a fan of like Sheldon and stuff?
Oh, well, kind of. I mean, they're from Houston. They're named after like the whole space program, right? Astros,
right?
NASA. Special shout out to Eric Kemp. Astros is actually his second favorite team. It's been that way since they lost. They beat the Dodgers back, 2017. Yeah. So, image of God. This is one of those studies where
you asked me to do this study.
I did
3 weeks ago, and what spurned that?
Well, because we didn't do it. We haven't had it. Well, it was one of those spots where, like, I can't believe we didn't have one because we're working on a thing. I'm not gonna disclose that yet. We're working on something, and in trying to lay it out, the image of God was one of those things, one of those subjects where I was like, we're bound to have a study somewhere. Like this is somewhere in the vault. Like if we don't have it online, Billy has this extra stash on his computer of studies that he's like started or outlined or whatever. It's probably 40 or 50 documents long.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, so there's one somewhere. No, we didn't have one. So Billy wrote it because it's important. When you ask people, what is the purpose of man? You can't talk about it biblically. You can't answer that question without addressing the original intent of God to make men in his image and likeness. And
right.
What the heck? What does that mean? Morning, ComCal. So yeah, I don't know. I was just surprised by us that we hadn't written one. And
I know we've talked about it on our
have.
show, but we didn't have any formal study. And I think it's you're right. It's kind of one of those foundational things. It's kind of like understanding the character of God when you're studying the Bible, understanding the image of God, because when you boil it down, and you're going to get this as we progress through this, it is ultimately representing God as you're following the gospel, as you're honoring him and giving him thanks, as you're trusting in him and doing what he says. That's ultimately like our purpose is to do that. And that's why he calls everyone to his purpose and gives everyone that message, AKA the universal witness.
Hey. Yeah. I mean, well, I'm gonna jump ahead a little. I mean, yeah, you look at like the summation of the entire law: love God and love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, that if you think about what does the Trinity do, right? They love each other within the Trinity, and then they love their creation and provide for them. So we're imaging God in that way. Or you think about like Romans 12, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so you can know God's good and perfect will. Well, the better you get to know him, the more you're going to understand and be like and want to be like him.
Mm-hmm.
and you're imaging him at that point, right? So I don't know, there's a whole bunch of those kind of things where like, yeah, that's not only is that the point that he made us for, but that's the thing we're consistently called to do and be. Yeah, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
So where do you want to start?
Was there any weird things that you ever heard growing up in church about the image of God?
I think usually the common answer that I would get is really a set of qualities. It wasn't necessarily that it was a calling or a responsibility or a role, but if you're being the image of God, then you have free will, and you have intelligence, consciousness in a way that is higher than animals. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. It wasn't ever. If you're made in the image of God, you have a responsibility to act and be like Him, or something like that.
Right.
You?
Yeah, things like, God can, in essence, create something out of nothing, so to speak. So the ex nihilo kind of thing. And as beings made the way we are, we can do that with creativity. In essence, we're making something out of nothing. Obviously, we're still using our experiences and stuff like that to make that stuff. But I've heard that kind of thing as well. And I've also, the reason I even mentioned the whole dress thing is because I've heard pastors try to use image as appearance and stuff like that. And yeah.
If you don't dress up on Sunday, you don't respect God. Yeah.
Did you get that? I was going to ask you.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. We've had entire sermons on a Sunday about dressing up on Sunday. So,
I mean, to an extent, like, I will agree with it to an extent. I'm not going to show up totally like grunge, right? I'm not going to take the clothes that I mowed the yarn in and wear those. Like, I don't want to be distracting or offensive. And likewise, I know my wife wouldn't. I'm not like, laying the law down. She would not want to go in something revealing or distracting, right? But that's kind of common courtesy for the people around you. I really don't think God cares. Really don't.
Yeah, and that doesn't relate to just clothes. That relates to how you speak, things that you say. And that's just like common, like love and self-sacrifice, is trying to do things not to offend other people or draw people away. Like if everyone is like dressed as like kings at church, well, you're going to be intimidated to, the poor man on the street to come into your church and want to learn about God. And likewise, if you're all dressed like bums and smell like the previous day, you may not want people coming in either.
It gets back to Romans 14. If that's how if you want to dress up because you consider that a praise in some way to God, thanking Him for your clothes, that's fine. Go for it. Knock yourself out, but don't impose that upon anybody else who may not feel that same compulsion. Ultimately, God's concerned about your heart, not your clothes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want this to be bigger so people can see it. So we're going to do it this way.
I didn't even know that was an option. Cool.
Yeah. All right. So the image of God, it's something that phrase is, if you've been involved in Christianity at all, or you've definitely heard, the imago Dei. But it's interesting because the phrase, when you actually go back and look at it, it's like a shortened version of what it actually says, which is, made in our image and after our own likeness. There's this extra caveat in there, extra description, extra comparison that is often left out. Image and likeness of God. So we're going to delve into what this actually means. Is there a difference between image and after our own likeness? Short answer, yes. And we're going to talk about what that means. But, ultimately, back in Genesis chapter 1, God created man on the sixth day, and, He gave life to all the creatures and plants and all that stuff. And then He made Adam and Eve, and, He breathed into them and said that they were made after our image and after our own likeness. So
actually, have you ever heard this? He said, "Let us make man in our image."
Yeah.
And then woman was made in man's image. You ever heard that?
Yeah, but if you just go down a couple chapters, you see the same phrase used.
Don't make us read the Bible. What are you doing?
Context and stuff like that.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So God's representative rulers. So Genesis 1:26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them." Oh, there's that darn context kind of stuff.
Wow.
And then we see Genesis 2:5. Now man did not yet exist to care for the land. And then Genesis 2:15. So the Lord God took Adam and placed him in the Garden of Eden to care for it and to guard it. And we use those last two verses to support the reason why it appears that God created us in his image and his likeness, which is to rule. And we see that that's carried out throughout the first chapters of Genesis.
Let's linger on that for a minute. God is sovereign. We have a couple episodes on that. We've got our study on that or two.
I wish I had a button. You just used a word that has
need like a siren. Yeah, right. He is the ruler. He has dominion over everything. But that does not mean that he can't delegate dominion over smaller things to other beings. Mm-hmm. And we could go off on a big rabbit trail like the rest of the episode on just where all that might have happened. But specifically for this topic, in Genesis 1 and 2, he is giving dominion over what we assume is a chunk of land, right? It's the garden. Mm-hmm. Giving mankind dominion over this land to care for it, to rule it, not outside of the bounds of what he's established, right? He does have rules. You can eat whatever you want except this one tree. So his delegated dominion is not. Is there another name for that? Lesser dominion. I mean,
like a proxy.
You think about? No, but like if he has dominion, then someone lower than him has something. I don't know. Anyway, someone leave it in the comments.
Delegated authority. I mean, that's what it is.
It is. Yeah. It's just delegated. So he still is giving some of that away, not all of it. And if you think about just practical things, like if you have a king may have landowners below him who have dominion over that part of their land to produce and to provide for the people around them, to pay a tax back to the king, things like that. It doesn't mean that the king is less sovereign. It just means that that's how he's choosing to rule, through delegated authority to other beings. That we'll leave it there, but I think that is something that some people really have a problem with. I don't get it.
Yeah, I don't get it either. Image, idol, mirror. So image and idols in the ancient world. So when most scholars go back and kind of or draw a parallel between between the image of God and images or idols of the kings or the rulers in the ancient world. Basically, obviously rulers couldn't be everywhere at once. The Pharaoh couldn't be everywhere all throughout the land that they ruled. So they would erect monuments or statues of themselves throughout their kingdoms, and these images kind of let everyone know that the king's rule extended to wherever his image was found. And there was also a additional aspect to this. Again, we talked about this delegated authority, where the king would have representatives that carried his rule throughout his land and throughout his kingdom. You see that we could all point to that kind of biblical example. The Roman prefect was the emperor's representative in various provinces. There was the person in Israel, right? That, when the Romans ruled the land of Israel, they would have prefects there and people that would, governors, so to speak, that were under the rule of the sovereign emperor of Rome, but yet still had delegated authority and were held responsible for the authority that they had.
Mm-hmm. And and we'll see this later too, the idea of idols being images and the contrast between, essentially everything on earth is made out of dirt, right? Any king, ancient, fake god, whatever, fallen angel, however you want to think about those other pantheons, any image of them was essentially made out of dirt. It was either wood or stone. Someone carved it, right? And it was a thing that people went and worshipped. Silliness. Same with the golden calf. And then you have in the 10 Commandments, don't make for yourself any graven image or likeness, right? Don't try to capture God in a block of wood. Why? Because he already took dirt and made an image and likeness for himself. Right? These lesser gods are so much lower. Them and their image is something that we can carve. It's lesser, right? Our God is so much higher than them that his image and likeness is sitting here having a conversation where nobody can carve us out of a block of wood. Like
Right.
we're the one. It's just, I don't know, the contrast, the levels there. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, these image bearers, like whether it be an idol or a person that had delegated authority from a sovereign, the purpose of them is to image or mirror the sovereign's rule, right? To be faithful to what the sovereign said and do his will and his kingdom. And that's kind of the foundation of what it means to be an image bearer of God, is that we are to show and share the light of God throughout his kingdom as his image bearers, being made in his image and likeness. And we're going to see that. I mean, obviously, he's going to hold us responsible. He's going to give us the capability to do that and hold us responsible for doing that as well.
You also think about like foreign delegates, things like that.
Yep.
A vassal. Yeah, I won't lie. I'll go ahead and ruin the rest of the episode for everybody else. Every time you say image bearer, I picture an image bear.
You just ruined the
You're
episode.
welcome. I know.
Now
every time you say it now, yeah. All right, let's continue.
All right, so I think most scholars, and it's kind of universally acknowledged, that the purpose of the narrative of being in our image and according to our likeness is to mark out similarities between God and man. That's what it's written for. It's to give the role of what it means, again, to rule and to mark out similarities between, God and his his creature. So the image and likeness of God are both kind of spiritual comparisons. They focus on different aspects of how we compare to God, how we are similar to God. We were talking about this before we started, about basically to try to incorporate this kind of image or likeness in a physical sense or a corporeal sense is kind of incoherent, because as we know, God is spirit. Matt mentioned, well, yeah, but maybe his like preferred avatar,
Well, okay, so yeah. Okay, we're gonna get to it later, talking about angels as well. Humankind is obviously made in the image of God, clear evidence in Scripture. We are gonna make the argument that angelic beings are as well, at least certain types of angelic beings, and there are a bunch. Go back and listen.
Yeah, there's
to those
also
episodes.
Some that look really weird, various heads and stuff. So,
I mean, yeah, and is that just kind of poetic imagery or whatever? It doesn't matter. So the question is, for the ones that look like us, I mean, take Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. They look like men, right? Some angels, sometimes we can entertain angels when we're unaware, just because we're being loving and they're interacting with us. Apparently, that's the thing. Really like to know if I've ever met an angel. That'd be cool. But they have apparently an image similar to us, and depending on how you believe, Genesis 6 and the Nephilim and stuff, maybe even anatomy similar to us. And, so does that mean that God has a kind of a preferred manifestation, form, whatever, right? Could it be physical? We don't actually know.
Right.
I agree. God is spirit. Jesus says that specifically. The Father is spirit. Jesus takes on many forms, but maybe this is like a preferred style of being. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Could be. So yeah, trying to understand a eternal and infinite God and how we lowly creatures like compare to him is kind of like, well, how can we do that? But
Worm.
I mean, what's that?
Worm. Yeah.
But when we probably kind of understand the idea of image and likeness, it gives us kind of a precise description in the ways, we are like our creator. So where was I on this one? So yeah, image and likeness, the two words are introduced by different Hebrew prepositions with quite different meanings. They describe two very distinct areas of spiritual similarity between God and man. So let's focus on image now. So we are made in God's image. We are also made according to his likeness. So that in and according to are actually two different prepositions that kind of give a distinction. Um, I'm of the mindset that God uses certain words in certain ways in order to provide, context and meaning behind what he's trying to tell us. So our image, which I think is kind of like our spiritual like nature makeup, is more closely comparable to God's image than to his likeness, based on like kind of these prepositions. Like it says like in God's image, as opposed to according to his likeness. The Hebrew word translated image in Genesis 1:26 is, Matt, you're the Hebrew scholar.
Not. I can read Greek and pronounce that Hebrew just but according to Bible Hub, Selem.
Yeah,
I believe. Okay. Yeah, sure.
From an unused root meaning to shade, a phantom, figuratively illusion, resemblance, hence a representative figure, especially an idol image. So you can kind of see it's like a phantom or a shadow of the object, right? It's resembling it. It's supposed to be like a representative figure. And again, that kind of really focuses on mirroring God. So we have an image like the angels and like our creator that of a spiritual essence. As we said before, I think it's pretty common knowledge that, God is spirit. Like angels, our spiritual image and the qualities it entails gives us a delegated authority that is to mirror our Lord. It kind of parallels that sovereignty of God and the spiritual facets and abilities to make proper use of it. So God obviously is sovereign king, sovereign ruler, king of kings, Lord of lords. And he, in order to exercise his authority, he has to have certain traits, capabilities in order to exercise his authority. And if he's delegating that authority to us, then we as his creatures need to have some aspects of those traits. We need to be, go ahead. I heard
it. Actually, it reminded me, what you're talking about reminds me a little bit of what Leighton has talked about. He said it a lot, actually. If you have a responsibility, it's the ability, you have to have the ability to respond, right? If we have the delegated responsibility of managing this world, of using our gifts that he's given us in ways that please him, we have to have the creativity, we have to have the ability to grow in understanding and the ability to, there's a bunch of like abilities that we would have to do the thing that he made us responsible for. Yeah, again, we could go off on a trail on those, but it does entail.
Like as a human, you wouldn't give delegated authority to watch over your children to a cat.
As many times as I've tried to give my dog that responsibility so we could go on a date, you're right. My wife says no.
They don't have the capabilities and the abilities to do that properly. And then to try to hold them accountable for that it's on you. It's not on anyone else.
Hey, so this did raise a question in my head about all humans. And what I mean is, so for Christians, we say that everybody has a spiritual gift. Romans 12, the Spirit gives a portion of faith to everybody so that they can use that gift to benefit the body and benefit the kingdom. Are those gifts something that they are only given to Christians, or are they given to everybody as a part of the word that's implanted? And because we're all his children, but then it is removed when that word is taken away if they rebel and leave, and he gives them over to their flesh. I mean, and I guess to the point, is that part of the image of God that everybody has these gifts, but some people will take those gifts and use them for their own fleshy means?
So I think I lean towards it's a spiritual gift given to believers. And it actually seems to be a New Testament gift. I'm not saying that God didn't gift people in the Old Testament. We see like God gifted, like, and as kind of you said, he gave them like physical and mental like gifts, like to create things and build things and all this other stuff and wisdom and stuff like that. But where is... It's in 1 Corinthians
12. Yeah, Romans 12, for as God has allotted to each a measure of faith, which I would think is probably more appropriately assurance. Like, this is your gift. This is your role.
I can't. It might be.
This is what we like to do on Bible Brodown. I like to ask Billy questions that he can't answer. So we have dead air. Hey, while we're doing that, I'm going to go back and hit a couple of Comcal's comments. So we should teach people what sovereign actually means. They think it means theistic determinism. Absolutely. Like the idea that it requires determinism. Does God determine to do every little thing? Does he determine every single molecule that moves? He set the rules for it. It doesn't mean he is like actively causing it. And he determine that to give us some delegated freedom over the things that he's put us in charge of? Yes, which means he is not actively determining all the things that he put us in charge of, because he's giving us that ability to please him through our actions. So yeah, I just, people really dumb that word down. It's sad. And then something that we will talk about before the end is the incarnation. How does that fit with the image of God? Obviously, Hebrews, he's the perfect image of God. So if he's the perfect image of God, then we are supposed to act in the way that he acted. But that's the perfect image of God. I don't know. I got questions. So we'll get
there. So yeah, for in him being Christ, you have been enriched in every way with all kinds of speech and with all kinds of knowledge, God thus confirming our testimony about Christ among you. Therefore, you do not lack any spiritual gift as you eagerly wait for our Lord Jesus. So it appears that it's certain gifts are only given to believers. Now, God could gift other people in various ways, and I think he does, to bring about his purposes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and part of me wonders, like, just the people who are naturally talented at stuff. Mm-hmm. They have strong leadership qualities, or whatever. That seems to be like a comparable thing to spiritual gifts within the church. Is that a person outside of the church is using what their natural talent God has given them just for their own means, instead of where it should be, which is loving God and loving his neighbor.
Right.
So it seems like.
Right. All right, I think we are on the next one. All right.
Likeness.
Yep. So likeness. So this one's a little more difficult, but I think how I understand it is most likely correct. So likeness, Damuth, it's a similitude. Our individual human personalities are similar to the three persons of the Trinity. Mankind is composed of like multiple members. Like mankind as a whole, we have multiple personalities out there. Now we're not all schizophrenic, but each person has their own individual personality.
Confessions with Billy.
Yeah, and each possesses an identical spiritual essence. So it's in the image of God and according to the likeness. We see this clearly kind of with the phrase that used with Adam and Eve, like, this is a book of generation of Adam. In the day which God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. So he's speaking to in terms of like both of them, like they were made in the likeness of God. Like they have this image of God, this spiritual essence, this spiritual nature, but within their individuality, they also have unique personalities, right? They have their own, it's not some hive mind where everyone is kind of like sharing, a brain, so to speak, or they don't really necessarily have a true conscious personality. Like you think of an animal. Yeah, people like, oh yeah, my animal has lots of personality, but it's not a conscious personality. It's all like instinctual, that's how they're behaving, with some trained behaviors as well. But as with mankind, according to our likeness, we have individual consciousness that has, strengths, weaknesses, things like that.
Personal idiosyncrasies. So this is something, I know you weren't planning for this, but you should have. Aliens. Okay.
Again, I really wish I had buttons. Like,
I wish I know, like
tinfoil hat discussion.
Exactly. I wish I had a tinfoil hat. I would have just put it on and waited, because you would know what was coming. So yeah, image of God. Jesus is the perfect image of God, right? So if hypothetically there are aliens out there, are they gonna look like us? I'm just saying. I mean, if Jesus is the perfect image and likeness of God, then isn't everything else like subpar? Or is that like for us specifically?
I don't even know where to go with that. I've always said, if aliens exist, then there's like, I don't think they have any crossover with us at all, because you don't see it anywhere in the Bible. I mean, if God has like a whole nother multiverse that he's doing other stuff with, it's, cool. I mean, neat to see, but I don't think we're going to be involved with it at all.
That's exactly what I would expect a government shill to say. So it's fine. Okay, back to study. Let's go.
Yeah.
So image, we're talking abilities. No, well, more like spiritual identity.
Mm-hmm.
Likeness is kind of the qualities of it. Is that fair, or am I getting mixed up?
Yeah. So likeness, in comparison to the Trinity, like within the Trinity, they all share, obviously, divinity, divine, godhood. However, they also have individual personalities, but within those individual personalities, they are all trying to do and follow the same will. I mean, the Son was on earth, had his own will, but was still submitting to the will of the Father. Like us, we all share the spiritual essence of God, in the image of God, but our likeness is that we have individual personalities. But again, even as with individual personalities, we're still called to image the sovereign.
This is where freedom, free will, to the extent that we have it, I would say we have a limited free will, if that's not too much of an oxymoron. But that's where the likeness part, that's where I would come in, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So we have, Billy and I share a brain, so that's not a good comparison. But I have a personality. Someone else at my church may have. We may approach a situation for the body in two very different ways, because I have my own gifts and personality and freedom, to the extent to be creative with those things, to act in a certain way to please God. Someone else may look at that situation and come up with a completely different approach, effectively doing the same thing, benefiting the kingdom, pleasing God, honoring him. But that's just because in our likeness, we are different on purpose. Fair?
Yeah, I don't actually have this written down, but I also would say likeness involving like personalities would probably also relate to roles, right? Like within the Trinity, there are individual distinct personalities, but they also all have a different role, right? The
Sure.
Spirit's role, the Son's role, the Father's role are all different. They share the same divine essence, but they have unique personalities with, that focus on different aspects or different roles within the kingdom, within the sovereign rule.
So, but you wouldn't say that those multiple things exist within a single person. You're saying that
no, it's humanity. Like likeness is not like, as humanity as a whole.
So, I mean, that which goes back to Romans 12, for just as we have many parts in one body, and all the body's parts do not have the same function.
Right.
So we who are many are one body in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
As in, we're kind of a introverted mouthpiece, and
right.
Someone else may be the hand or the foot or the whatever.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm with you.
We could just be a smelly odor part, and all this is just the smelly odor.
We're the armpit. Is that what you're saying? No, it's armpit of Christ. Got it.
Yeah. Little gods. Now we're gonna get into. People are gonna start calling us.
Hey, we'll go ahead and I'll switch out my tinfoil hat with my Mike Heiser hat. How about that?
All right. Little gods. The human race acts as stewards for God, having his spiritual essence, a spirit. Again, God breathes his spirit into us. We are image is of God, and ourselves gods, as stated later by the psalmist and Christ. Psalm 28 says 8:6-7. I said, you are gods and sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you will die like men and fall like any one of the princes. Jesus 10:34 quotes this. He said, is it not written in your law? I said, you are gods. And people, whenever you start like talking about humans being little gods, people just go bananas, because they think that means like there's multiple gods, or we're going to become gods, or anything like that. And maybe to help people like grasp this meaning and not like freak out, little gods is basically just stating like you are part of the divine nature, right? You're not a god like the big G, right? You don't deserve worship or anything like that. You are just a small g. You share in his qualities, again, made in his image and his likeness, and that comes with responsibility.
Yeah, it has. We saw this in the study on Elohim, right? The angel study from 2 or 3 Octobers ago, where there are many Elohim. It's just a catch-all for spiritual being, essentially. In the same way, this word and the idea that, you know, people are gods, quote unquote, I think just has to do with the level of dominion that they have, level of sovereignty that they have. God, obviously, is Yahweh, is the God, the
Right.
God of gods. There is no one like him. There is none who can approach his power, can thwart his purposes if he determines something. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't given us, again, going back to the first thing that we talked about, it doesn't mean he hasn't given us dominion over certain things here on earth.
Right. Like he's
With
the
the
capital
expectation.
king. He's the capital king, but he also establishes little kings.
Yeah. Or earls and dukes and
Yeah.
whatever. So yeah, he's given us dominion over that. And I think scripture using El is just kind of calling us quote unquote gods over the things that we've been given. That's it. Not saying we are God like
Right.
God is. I mean, we're not elevating ourselves to that.
Right.
Obviously within our proper place.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, when you look at, as we're going to talk about here, like just like angels, who again we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but seem to also be made in the image of God, share the spiritual essence of God. They're also called like El, right? Little gods. I will praise you, O Lord, with all my heart. Before the gods, I will sing your praise. In context here, before the gods is referring to angels. Psalm 97:7. All who worship images are put to shame, but those who boast in idols worship him, all you gods. Again, speaking of the angels. So it's using the El phrase. And when you go back to Genesis 5:1, this is the book of generations of Adam. In the day when God created man, he made them in the likeness of God. That phrase there, he made them in the likeness of God. God there is in the plural, the Elohim form. And here again, it's the El form. It's, like little gods.
Hang on 1 second. I do want to comment on ComCal bringing up Mormons taking the idea of us being gods to a whole new level. Absolutely. We need to do another episode on Mormonism. The Latter-day Saints, because they don't like being called Mormons anymore, do absolutely take that concept and just run with it as if in the end times, eschatologically speaking, or after the end times, any good Latter-day Saint will become an actual God. They take the step of elevating a person to the level of God the Father later in time, which biblically speaking, biblical Christianity does not allow for. It is absolutely incorrect. So
right. But when you go back and look at us being called El and the angels being called El, it makes sense again, because both angels and man are created in God's image and are to be image bearers. So they share that spiritual essence, that quality, because in both instances, angels and man have been given delegated authority. So it's like part of that divine nature, that divine essence, that image of God, that spiritual essence that we have, that brings with it, again, the responsibility to image God, that authority and delegation and responsibility.
Yeah. Jordan is asking what verse it is that says that we are gods. It's a pull from Psalms. Here, let's back up real quick. That's not the one. All right, there we go. So Jesus is quoting in John 10, Psalm 82, where it says, you are gods, right? You have divine counsel stuff going on possibly in here. I think it's interesting too, that because we are in the image of likeness of God, and we've been given think Hebrews 10. We've been given the ability to approach God with prayers and supplications, etc. In a certain sense, in the New Testament time, the church age, we are also acting as divine counsel. We get to make requests to God. We get to offer, yes, thanks, praise are key. We did a whole prayer study, right? Are key to that. But we can also ask for specific things to be changed in the world. And God has shown us that he is willing to listen and to act on our behalf. Sometimes, not all the time. And that is exactly the kind of, I think, divine counsel role that we saw in the Old Testament, but being done by angelic beings. And to some extent, I mean, you could say that Moses was acting in that way when he interceded on behalf of Israel so that God didn't destroy all of them, things like that. So I think the image of God does carry that role as well. And I think you see that same thing here when Jesus is taking, if Psalm 82 is about the angelic divine counsel, Jesus is taking it to the next level and saying, well, you Jews, this applied to you, right? So interesting.
All right, so I thought I had another.
What'd you do?
Okay, there's a couple of other verses that are in my study that I didn't mention. Do I not have it? Nope. All right, so I want to read Psalm 8, 4-8. So, of what importance is the human race that you should notice them? Of what importance is mankind that you should pay attention to them and make them a little less than the angels? You grant mankind honor and majesty. You appoint them to rule over your creation. You have placed everything under their authority, including all the sheep and cattle, as well as the wild animals, the birds in the sky, the fish in the sea, and everything that moves through the currents of the seas. And you think about that in relation to mankind and angels, right? So we still see this delegated authority that we read in Genesis within Psalm 8, 4-8. And this passage, Psalm 8, 4-8, kind of also provides that connection between mankind and the angels, right? As both being mighty ones, as both being gods, as both having been given authority and delegation from God by his delegated sovereignty. and Psalm 8, 4-8, again, looking at like make them, you grant honor and majesty, you appoint them to rule, you place everything under their feet. That's describing man acting in their proper capacity as an image bearer or as a servant of God who's faithfully ministering in God's creation and doing the things that he had delegated to mankind to do. And obviously we failed at that. We failed pretty hard. And it took about 4,000 years for God to send another representative to show us how to do it correctly.
Yep. You have a Trinity Radio in the chat making fun of your color palette for your for your PowerPoint. Darth Vader. I had a thing I was going to say. I don't remember what it was. So let's go.
That's because Darth Vader, Star Wars, it just,
I know. I'm reading the comments. I'm trying to keep up.
Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier about, the perfect image bearer, which is the Son. And Colossians 1:15 says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. So like mankind, like the angels, the Son shares in God's image, but also has his own personality. We see that in Luke, not my will, but your will. We too share in God's image and also have our own personality, who we are to be like the Son and be servants of his will by mirroring him. And that's kind of what the Son did. He I do nothing, except what I've, how does it say? There's nothing that I do. What worse am I thinking of? I only basically, the Son only did the Father's will, only see what the Father does. That's what he was doing. And that's kind of the example that we should be taking.
Well, in Hebrews 1:3, he is the radiance of his glory and exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power. So, he is the ideal. He is the goal that we should strive towards. right? Christ is the embodiment of everything that we were intended to be, but we fall short of. And then when you see things like "Be holy as I am holy," or the example we're constantly pulled towards, the image of God has been there. Even when I think about, what am I thinking of? Galatians 3, where you have the covenant of faith established and you have the law established, and it doesn't cancel out the covenant of faith,
Right.
but it is meant to point people back to faith. That was the point of the law, as a tutor towards faithfulness. And you wonder, well, you don't wonder, if you look at it, the goal of the law, the goal of physical Israel, was to bring people to understanding, fearing, following God, and imaging him. Like it all comes back to the original purpose, which was be like God intended you to be, which was like him. And don't worship down. I mean, angels are not, we're a little lower than the angels. Well, that is not worthy of praise there. I mean, yes, they're cool, but God is the one who made them. Worship him. Don't worship a stupid idol. That's even below you. It's something you pulled out of a tree or pulled out of a rock. Like, don't worship down, worship up, and follow that example.
Right. Yeah, you kind of see, mankind as a whole was given this image of God, like to mirror God and to care for. We failed at that, and then God then, in essence, created a divine council and took on Israel to be that human representative to share the light of God and to be the example to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
they kind of failed at that. So then he comes back again with his son, who then shows and then incorporates the world back into it, is again to kind of reestablish that you guys are the light of the world. You're going to be spread throughout the world and be priesthood within the kingdom, doing his will and the Father's will.
For sure.
All right, so now we get into rulership and what it requires. So we're in this image of God, and we are according to his likeness, but and the intent there again is so that he may rule. And so the central point of, again, this image and likeness is so that we can rule. We need to have the abilities and responsibilities to exercise this task that he's given us. If you were to narrow down, and this is kind of, it's difficult to narrow down like what everything would be required, but I narrowed it down, and we're gonna have scripture to back this up. But in the essence to rule would include consciousness, choice, and conscience. These are pertinent to being stewards and image bearers, and we need to possess these qualities to rule as his image bearers and to be held accountable to that. So, knowledge and accountability, Romans 3:19-20. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be closed and all the world may become accountable to God. Because by the works of the law, no flesh will be justified in his sight, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. So here we have in Romans 2, it talks about conscience that we'll get to here in a minute, in the law written on our hearts. But it's that law that we have within, and this knowledge that we have that God has given his image bearers that keeps us accountable to God. So we have to have the ability to know this knowledge and and if we know, then we can become accountable to it. Much like the gospel message, man. Like, how can you be held accountable to something that you actually have never heard about? So,
well, if you think about it, so if the law is pointing us back, the law is exposing sin. It's essentially saying, hey, your job was to be like me. Your job was to be like God. Here's all the ways you're failing. Like, this is what you're not doing, and so there's no way to fix that. You just have to appeal to God's mercy. And that's like what Romans 3 is about. Everybody fails according to the law, but the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Now you can appeal to him and be faithful like Christ, and through Christ's faithfulness be righteous in God's eyes. Like, it's just a divine act of mercy and forgiveness.
Right. Consciousness, Hebrews 10:2 says, otherwise would they not have ceased to be offered, because the worshippers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have had consciousness of sin. 1 Corinthians 4:4 says, for I am conscious of nothing against myself, yet I am not by this acquitted, but the one who examines me is the Lord. So the point of these is to understand that we understand that we are, it's kind of like I think, therefore I am kind of thing, right? Getting a little bit of philosophy. Okay, oh man, we're combining philosophy with theology. How do you do that? I mean, you can't, as is it Jonathan Pritchett says, you can't have theology without philosophy. Yeah.
I think he and Braxton both said it.
Yeah.
Trinity, chime in.
Yeah. Trinity Radio. Go check them out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you have to understand and have self-awareness, consciousness, in order to, and knowledge in order to rule, in order to have delegated authority. You have to be able to think and to have a mind that can have rationalization and logical and all these various aspects that are involved in rule.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. Another rabbit hole. So I've been listening to the Lex Fridman podcast. It's like Joe Rogan, if you never heard it, but I think Lex originally his focus was more on AI and programming and stuff like that. He's kind of branched out into all kinds of things at this point. But what is consciousness? What is life? The Turing test, things like that, always come up on his podcast. And so when you're describing consciousness, I'm thinking, okay, what makes us different than a really good AI, and like especially like within the next 20 years, because they could think logically about something. They can assess a situation and act in a certain way. So what makes us, our consciousness, different than that?
Well, when you narrow down any computer, it's ones and zeros. It's if-thens. And humanity,
if you narrow us down, how do you know that our consciousness doesn't boil down to some kind of spiritual 1 and 0?
I don't.
Here I am expecting Billy to answer the hard problem of consciousness in the middle of an episode.
No, so like you said, it almost gets like determinism, right? Where ultimately an AI is going to get to that last, go through all these various possibilities and kind of get to that last, like, if then, right? And then it was determined based on all these other algorithms that's where it was going to go. Boolean logic. That's probably the correct phrase. I'm just going to rely on the expertise of our audience. Yes.
Thanks, AK.
It's been 25 years since I did computer programming. So
we have people like Penrose now who are trying to argue that consciousness is a quantum function, but I couldn't explain exactly why. I just think it's interesting. So you mentioned logic, the ability to reason. I think self-reflection is important.
Yes,
the ability to examine one's own motivations and things like that.
Yeah,
and emotion as well.
I am conscious of nothing against myself. Self-examination, right? Having knowledge of right and wrong and being able to examine yourself against that and understand that you're accountable to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is a big difference. We can't always explain exactly why. I do think it's interesting that as we try to develop AI, Skynet, robots that'll try to kill us. I think it's interesting that our the things that we're making in our image and likeness are getting more and more advanced, but they still fall like so short of
very much so
the biological, like what we have. It's just
like the complexity of the cell, right? And then you add that cell that turns into an eye, and the complexity of the eye. It's just like, even with like all the advanced cameras and stuff like that, they still have no comparison to the eye.
Yeah, our God programmed in DNA, and we can't figure out how to get past zeros and ones.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. All right. Conscience. Romans 2:14-16. We love Romans 2. We love Romans, really. For whenever the Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature the things required by the law, These who do not have the law are a law to themselves. They show that the work of the law is written in their hearts, as their conscience bears witness, and their conflicting thoughts accuse or else defend them on the day when God will judge the secrets of human hearts, according to the gospel through Jesus Christ. Romans 1:32 says, and this is after the whole scheme of people, having knowledge and not doing that knowledge. It says, although they fully know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, they not only do them, but also approve of those who practice them. So this is about, again, these innate qualities that must be within our image that gives us the delegated authority and ability to rule for God, or to image him within the world, to share his rule, his will, his authority, his light to the rest of the world. Part of having and the responsibility of doing that, like, are we doing it correctly, is that law written in our hearts and that conscience that we have, that he's placed within us, that helps us and is in essence required to be efficient and effective image bearers. Rawr,
Yeah.
bear.
Those dang image bears. This is essentially God putting his holiness in us, right? This is right. I mean, if we think about Euthyphro's dilemma, does God pick good and bad arbitrarily, or is he appealing to a higher standard? Neither. We understand good and bad because of who he is, how he would act is good, how he would not act in a situation is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And he's saying that everybody has a little bit of that in them, sufficiently to know that these are the right things to do, morally speaking, and this is wrong. And if you read the rest of Romans 2, that people know that they're doing wrong, that they're violating, that they're testing the patience of God in doing the things that they know are wrong.
Yeah. It's just like if I gave you the task, Matt, of like, you need to, go through this land and drive a car from here to there, but there's certain places that I don't want you to drive. And then I don't tell you or provide you any information on what places, like our conscience and like the law written in our hearts is kind of like cones, right? That kind of give you direction of where you're supposed to be in this task that I'm doing, right? If I didn't provide that, then how could I hold you accountable to do what I wanted you to do? He's given that within each of us as part of his image to have this conscience, to understand his holiness and his will, so that we can then accomplish it and understand that we're accountable to it, and understand that when we fall short of it, we need to go back and seek him for, mercy.
That's right. Amen.
All right, last one, responsibility. We have responsibility. Galatians 6:8, for the one who sows to his own flesh will reap from the flesh corruption, but the one who sows to the Spirit will reap eternal life. Deuteronomy 30:19, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I've set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. So choose life in order that you may live. And then Genesis 4:7, if you do well, will you not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. So again, part of this image is knowledge, is the ability to make choices, the responsibility of those choices that we make. It's all part of a person that needs to image the Creator and who's been given divine delegation to rule as in his, as a representative.
Yep. And that's part of, again, the idea of responsibility is there are blessings and curses. There's reward and there's punishment, depending on what you do with the responsibility you've been given. And what is at the very end of Revelation, it says Jesus is coming back to give to each according to what they've done. So there has to be a sense of freedom. To what extent we can argue about, but there has to be a sense of freedom in which we are able to, in the dominion we've been given, act unilaterally. Is that the right word? To make determinations within the bounds of what we've been given, and we are then responsible for it. And that goes to some of the parables, right? If someone's given
The talents.
the parable of the talents, where one guy just buries it in the ground, he's in trouble, but the rest grow it. So the one who grows by 10, by 100, whatever, will be rewarded based on that.
Right.
Yeah, no, that all requires freedom to an extent to actually make those determinations. And
Right.
that was given to us by God. Not that we are more sovereign than God, but that this is the little bubble we were allowed to play in. So, to originate determinations, I like that.
All right. So last little section here, unless we want to do the other one, is the ultimate image bearer. So as image bearers in the fallen world, we now struggle with a weak flesh. And we are, our goal as image bearers is again to mirror the Creator, to do His will, to imitate Him, and do the task that He's delegated us with. But again, we failed in that, and God sent forth His Son who took on humanity, took on our own flesh as well, and showed us how to be the ultimate image bearer who was faithful to Him who appointed Him. Colossians 1:15, we've already mentioned this one, but He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of creation. 1 Peter 2:21, for this you have been called because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in His steps. 1 John 2:6, whoever says he abides in Him ought to walk in the same way in which He walked. So the Son, in essence, provided not only did He perform the task of atonement and redemption, etc., but He also, in His walk on earth for 3.5 years, provided us the example of how to, submit, not listen to the desires of our flesh, but to submit to the Spirit, how to honor God and give Him thanks, how to love God with all our heart and all our mind and all our soul, and love each other as ourselves, etc., or love others as we love ourselves.
And continues to, even though He is with the Father, preparing a way for us, preparing a place for us. He put His Spirit within us, all believers. So we have this continued testimony, witness, comfort, guidance that is always pointing us back to imaging God appropriately.
Right. Ephesians 4:24, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Right. So that is what we are doing. So we had this, this fall that has kind of given us this corrupt flesh that, can affect our personalities and how we behave. And we're to put on that new self, that spirit that has been given as another gift to us to help us be more in the likeness, or be able to imitate God more, so like be conformed more like the Son.
Good stuff. Do we want to, I think we've hit on a couple of these other verses. Do we want to go to the next section? We've been an hour, or
this one?
Yeah, briefly hit on this.
Yeah. So earlier we mentioned like there is a similarity between image of God and the angels and man, and in both had been given dominion over various things, and unfortunately, both failed at doing those tasks as well. But we know God created the angels, and angels were created holy, and God gave them distinctive responsibilities and domains in which to exercise that delegated authority. And for those of you who are listening and not watching, we have references for all of this stuff, and I encourage you to. We'll post this study to our blog site, BibleBrodown.com, and also if you want to watch the YouTube, you can. We know at some point before the temptation of Adam and Eve, Satan and many other angels had already fallen. So then God comes and places man on earth. Man is given a similar delegated authority that many angels rejected, and God. It appears that God met man to assume a very similar role that to the one that was abandoned by like Satan, some of the angels and his followers, namely, faithful obedience and supervision of God's creation.
What's interesting is, so there's a couple passages who I'm just thinking of that I know I don't know. It's in Ezekiel and one other where people think it's about Satan. Maybe you can remember those. But really it's talking about the king of Tyre and the king of somewhere else. Right. The description of those kings is the reason why people think it's about Satan is because it's very angelic. It's very holy, very kind of over the top in terms of how God describes these kings and what they had the ability to do, the expectation God had for them, and their epic fall from that because they didn't listen. They didn't use the authority they've been given in the way that God intended. And yeah, you're right. I think it's interesting. Again, I'm hearing like Michael Heiser in my head about talking about the kingdoms of the nation of the world being divided up among the sons of God, but among the angels, possibly as dominion. You see that kind of in Daniel, the prince of Persia opposing was it Michael or in you also see the geographic kind of worship stuff within oh man, I'm losing my names today. Who was it that asked for a load of dirt? You know what I'm talking about. He went and rinsed in the anyway. You see angels having that kind of thing, but then you see humans given that geographic dominion as well. Acts 17 says God is still over the establishment of the different kingdoms, their times and boundaries. But that doesn't mean that the people who were in it at the time didn't have dominion to hopefully do Romans 13, what a government is supposed to do, which is to suppress evil and promote good.
It says Christ is over all the principalities and dominions and etc.
He's been placed over everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So
we actually we had a comment about the Satan is transliterated, etc. Means, the adversary, the enemy, the accuser. Yeah, we have an actual study that we did, I think a couple of years ago during our October timeframe on Satan, the devil, and go through all of that, and talk about, is it many of these passages where people may say that it's talking about like Satan or Lucifer, etc. Is Lucifer really the right word, etc. It's a good study. Kind of opens up your eyes that
the Old Testament doesn't really have an individual
right
singular Satan. And in some cases, like in Job, we don't even know that he's necessarily evil. He's just, he's more acting as like a what is it called? Not a defense attorney, but a prosecutor. He's acting like a prosecutor saying, well, I mean, look at this guy. He has everything. Of course he's going to love you, God. Let's test him. I don't know that that's evil. That's just his role. But New Testament definitely has a singular evil guy.
So obviously there's differences between us and God. There's also differences between us and the angels, knowledge, power, corporality, etc. But we share that spiritual essence like they do, that is to image and the likeness of our Creator. We both share that intelligence, that sentience, that moral responsibility, that ability to know right and wrong, etc. When we look at all the creatures outside of Earth, outside of man, it's only man who shares these qualities, right? This consciousness, this responsibility, this ability to like choose and all this stuff. And from everything that we read in Scripture, the angels have that same capacity. And again, it boils down to because they also had this role and they share in the dominion of this delegated authority from the sovereign. Again, you mentioned Michael Heiser in the Divine Council. It's very, very good if you've not kind of understood this biblical perspective of the Divine Council with the angels and then bringing on humanity, etc., and how that all worked together and how Christ was involved with that and brought back God, the people of Earth back to God instead of just focusing on Israel, etc. It's a great study.
The unifying of the nations, or I guess the pulling out of the kingdom of God from the nations is probably a better way to put it. So the image of God, it's hard to talk about because I thought that was the last slide.
Yep. So
there's more bears.
This is basically summing it up. Basically, our first parents had delegated authority to rule over the earth and not eat the tree. Obviously, they failed, but we don't really see a narrative that says that we lost that delegated authority to care for the earth. In fact, we read a verse earlier from, I think, Psalm or Proverbs that still said, that we have this authority. And what's interesting is in Genesis 3, in fact, in eating of the tree, like the one thing that we weren't supposed to do, God says we became more like him, right? Now that man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. It's interesting that understanding. So obviously God could have, I don't think anyone doubts that God could have created creatures to serve him that kind of would have been incapable of sin or rebellion. But he desires creatures to, I think, true honor, true praise, true worship, true love, all kind of there has to be a choice involved in that. And when you start bringing in determinism and, you could look at it like in human terms, like, you give someone drugs and a roofie and all this other stuff to kind of make them or change their personality. It's not real. And I think that we see that throughout the narrative of the Bible, God has given us all these qualities within his being image bearers to honor him and give him thanks, and the responsibility to do that and the task to do that. And he's going to, again, hold us accountable. As you said, Matt, he's going to come and judge the earth and give each one according to what he's done.
Yep. I do think so. We've touched on aliens, AI, robots. I get political for just a second.
Great.
I know. I want to just push all the buttons if I can. So I do think that for me, over the course of my adulthood, this call, the responsibility by being given the image of God, by being given the dominion over earth, has made me more aware and more sensitive to the environment, to taking care of it, to promoting its well-being and health. And I think some people in the United States, especially within like the Bible Belt, may get more caught up in politics and just oppose, that liberal environmental wacky nonsense. I think there's definitely wacky nonsense pushed in, but I think that as Christians, promoting the environment and protecting it and preserving what God has made and using it responsibly is actually something that's really good. I have no problem with that at all. In fact, I think it should be promoted within church that hey, this space that God gave us, let's not just totally upend it. Let's use it in a way that is responsible and whatever. Image of God.
Yes. So ultimately, it's the image of God makes us image bearers, makes us want to mirror God and be like him, which all ties directly into, the Great Commission, to honoring the gospel, to your walk as a disciple. All of it intertwines nicely together like it should, because I mean, he's obviously way above us and knows how to do stuff like that.
It's pretty competent. Yeah. We can't talk about the image of God. This episode, as much as Billy tried to keep it on track, was a little all over the place, because you can't talk about the image of God without seeing it literally everywhere in Scripture. Now, it is one of the underlying principles in all of Scripture, and the thing that we're called back to. So, it's hard to talk about without chasing some rabbits here and there. But yeah, I think we had a few comments on the way I'd starred, but I don't know if we're gonna have time to get to them. Any other stuff? Any announcements? What do we do next time? You had some good notes.
Next time, I think we're gonna talk about it's in my
Would you
email.
call it a baptism episode? Would that
It's
frustrate too many people? Or adoption episode, maybe?
Yeah, it's really baptism, born again, and adoption, and examining that from the Jewish, Hebrew, like cultural perspective of like how they understood that and what that actually means. It's not what we've made it out to be. Well, what many people make it out to be. It's very interesting. Like when it talks about being a new creation and being like born anew and like all this other stuff. It's all in the ancient literature of what that stuff means and how they took it.
That's right. AK likes our stuff on baptism. Just wait. It's going to get good. Yeah. So born again, adoption, baptism, all that. God willing next week. But with us, something may come up. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, just to give you a telltale sign, one of the biggest things that people struggle with in the once saved, always saved camp, like, they'll say, how can you be unborn? And that comes with it, like this idea that being born again, there's some kind of transformation, like supernatural transformation that is occurring within that like context of like being born again or being regenerated. And that's not how it was understood in Jewish culture. In fact, that's why Jesus used this phrase, because the Jewish culture and the Jewish history had those words and phrases within them. So,
boom.
Next time you'll find out what that means.
Cool. All right. Well, work is beckoning. So
yep. All right.
Thanks for joining us.
And we will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening. God bless.
God bless.